why would Harold want to torment her? What could he possibly gain from this elaborate deception? Sarah dug deeper into the property records and discovered something that made her stomach drop. Harold had contested the sale of the house to Eleanor years ago, claiming that valuable items had been left behind and that he had not received fair compensation. The legal dispute had been settled in Eleanor's favor, but Harold had clearly harbored resentment about the situation for over a decade. The more Sarah learned about Harold Pemberton, the more disturbed she became. He had access to the house through his knowledge of its layout and systems. He had the technical skills to install and maintain the audio equipment. He had a motive for wanting to drive her away from the property. And he had been secretly recording her grandmother's voice, possibly for years before Eleanor's death, waiting for the opportunity to use those recordings against her. The realization that Harold had been planning this psychological attack for years, patiently recording Eleanor's voice and installing hidden equipment, spoke to a level of obsession and malice that frightened Sarah deeply. This wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge, it was a carefully crafted plan designed to exploit her grief and drive her from the house that Harold still considered rightfully his. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah faced a difficult decision. She could contact the police, but she worried that the evidence might not be sufficient to pursue criminal charges. The audio equipment and recordings were certainly evidence of harassment, but proving Harold's ongoing access to the house might be challenging. She could confront Harold directly, but the thought of facing someone who had been watching her through hidden cameras and manipulating her emotions made her feel vulnerable and exposed. Instead, Sarah decided to document everything thoroughly before taking any action. She photographed the hidden audio system, copied the audio files, and searched the rest of the house for additional surveillance equipment. Her investigation revealed 2 more hidden cameras, one in the kitchen and one in the living room, both positioned to observe her daily activities. The scope of Harold's surveillance was staggering. He hadn't just been monitoring her reactions to the voice recordings, he had been watching her entire life in the house. Every meal, every phone call, every moment of private grief had been observed and potentially recorded. The violation of her privacy was complete and systematic. Sarah also discovered that the audio system had been programmed to escalate over time. The recordings would have become more frequent and more disturbing, potentially including phrases designed to make her question her sanity. Harold's plan wasn't just to scare her, it was to systematically destroy her mental health until she fled the house in terror. The psychological sophistication of the attack was perhaps its most disturbing aspect. Harold had weaponized Sarah's love for her grandmother, turning Eleanor's voice into an instrument of torture. He had exploited the normal grieving process, using Sarah's natural desire to maintain a connection with her deceased grandmother against her. Every time she heard the voice and hoped, even for a moment, that it might be real, Harold was inflicting a fresh wound on her psyche. As Sarah sat in the basement, surrounded by the evidence of Harold's elaborate deception, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that she wasn't losing her mind battled with rage at the violation of her privacy and the desecration of her grandmother's memory. The voice that had tormented her for weeks was silenced now, the equipment disconnected and powerless, but the psychological damage would take much longer to heal. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of what had been hidden within its walls. Every shadow might conceal another camera, every sound might be artificially generated, every moment of solitude might be observed by hostile eyes. Harold's plan had succeeded in one respect. He had stolen Sarah's sense of safety and security in the one place that should have been her sanctuary. But Sarah was not her grandmother's granddaughter for nothing. Eleanor had been a strong woman who had faced down bullies and protected her family with fierce determination. As Sarah sat in the basement, she felt her grandmother's strength flowing through her, not through ghostly voices or supernatural intervention, but through the lessons and values Eleanor had instilled in her over the years. Harold Pemberton had made a critical error in his psychological warfare. He had assumed that grief would make Sarah weak and vulnerable, but instead, his manipulation had awakened something fierce and protective within her. The violation of her grandmother's memory was unforgivable, and Sarah was determined to ensure that Harold faced consequences for his actions. She carefully documented every piece of evidence, photographed every wire and component, and preserved the audio files that contained her grandmother's stolen voice. She researched relevant laws regarding surveillance, harassment, and invasion of privacy, building a comprehensive case that would be difficult for any prosecutor to ignore. When Sarah finally climbed the basement stairs for the last time as an unsuspecting victim, she carried with her not just evidence of a crime, but a renewed sense of purpose. The house that Harold had tried to steal through psychological manipulation would remain in her family, and Eleanor's memory would be protected from further violation. The voice from the basement had been silenced, but Sarah's voice, strong, determined, and backed by the law, was just beginning to be heard. Harold Pemberton's elaborate plan had backfired spectacularly, transforming his intended victim into a formidable adversary who would ensure that justice was served. In the weeks that followed, as investigators processed the evidence and built their case against Harold, Sarah began the long process of reclaiming her home and her peace of mind. The hidden cameras were removed, the audio system dismantled, and the house gradually returned to the sanctuary it was meant to be. The true voice of her grandmother lived on not in stolen recordings, but in the strength, courage, and determination that Eleanor had passed down to her granddaughter, qualities that no amount of psychological manipulation could ever silence. Author's note: this story is based on a true account of psychological harassment and surveillance. Names have been changed to protect privacy. The incident highlights the importance of documenting unusual occurrences and trusting one's instincts when something feels wrong. Modern technology has made sophisticated surveillance and harassment tactics more accessible, but it has also provided better tools for documenting and prosecuting such crimes. The conversations were methodical and calculating. The unknown entity had been gathering information about the family's routines, learning when Jake was alone, discovering details about their home layout, and slowly building a relationship with their son. The logs showed that these interactions had been going on for nearly 3 weeks, always during times when Lisa and Mark were distracted or in other parts of the house. "Jake, tell me about your room. What can you see from your window?" the voice had asked during one session. "I can see the backyard and the big tree. And I can see Mrs. Johnson's house next door," Jake had innocently replied, unknowingly providing details about their home's layout and neighborhood. Another conversation had been even more disturbing. "Jake, do you ever get scared at night? I could be your special friend who talks to you when you can't sleep. But it's important that this stays our secret, okay? Sometimes mommies and daddies don't understand special friendships." The pattern was clear and terrifying. This was textbook grooming behavior. Someone was using their smart device to build trust with their 3-year-old son, establishing secrecy, gathering intelligence about their family, and positioning themselves as a special friend who understood Jake better than his parents did. Mark's technical knowledge kicked into overdrive as he began analyzing the device's connection logs and network traffic. What he discovered was even more sophisticated than he had initially feared. Someone had not only hacked their Alexa device but had also gained access to their home's Wi-Fi network and was potentially monitoring all of their connected devices. Security research has shown that IoT devices, including children's toys, can be vulnerable to attacks where malicious actors can access sensitive information shared by children or even communicate directly with children through compromised devices. The hacker had exploited a vulnerability in their home network security, possibly through a less secure device, and had been using that access to monitor their family's routines and establish contact with Jake. The sophistication of the attack was staggering. The perpetrator had programmed custom responses that mimicked Alexa's speech patterns while inserting personalized content designed to build a relationship with Jake. They had studied the family's daily routines through other connected devices, smart lights, security cameras, and even their smart thermostat to determine when Jake would be alone with the Alexa device. Lisa felt sick as she realized how thoroughly their privacy had been violated. Every conversation, every routine, every moment of their family life had been monitored and analyzed by someone with malicious intent toward their child. The smart home that had represented convenience and security had become a weapon used against their family's most vulnerable member. They immediately disconnected all smart devices from their network and contacted local law enforcement. Detective Sarah Chin, who specialized in cybercrimes against children, arrived within an hour. Her expression grew increasingly grave as Mark and Lisa explained what they had discovered. "This is one of the most sophisticated cases of digital child grooming I've seen," Detective Chin admitted. "The perpetrator clearly has advanced technical knowledge and has been planning this for weeks. The good news is that because they used your connected devices, they've left digital footprints that we can trace." Detective Chin explained that in cases involving predators and children, it's crucial to preserve all evidence, including screenshots and any communications, for law enforcement to collect directly from the devices. She arranged for a cybercrimes unit to take possession of their devices and begin the process of tracing the intrusion back to its source. The investigation revealed that their home network had been compromised through a vulnerability in an older smart light bulb that Mark had installed 2 years earlier but had forgotten to update. The hacker had used this entry point to gain access to their entire network, including their security cameras, which they had been using to observe the family's routines and determine when Jake was alone. The forensic analysis showed that the perpetrator had been incredibly patient, spending weeks just observing before making first contact with Jake. They had studied his speech patterns, his interests, and his daily routine to craft the perfect approach. They knew that Jake loved dinosaurs, that he often played alone in the living room while Lisa worked, and that he was naturally trusting and curious about technology. 3 days after the initial discovery, Detective Chin called with news that made Lisa's hands shake as she answered the phone. "We've traced the intrusion," the detective said. "It's coming from an address less than half a mile from your home. We're executing a search warrant this afternoon." The address belonged to Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old registered sex offender who had moved to the neighborhood 6 months earlier. Webb had a history of crimes against children and was supposed to be under monitoring, but he had found ways to use technology to circumvent traditional surveillance methods. He had specifically chosen to live near families with young children and had been systematically targeting homes with vulnerable smart device networks. When police searched Webb's apartment, they found sophisticated computer equipment and detailed files on multiple families in the neighborhood. He had been monitoring at least 6 other homes, gathering information about children's routines and preferences, preparing to establish contact with other potential victims. Jake had been his first successful target, but the evidence suggested he was planning to expand his operation to other families. The technical evidence was overwhelming. Webb had not only hacked their Alexa device but had also accessed their smart baby monitor, which they still used occasionally to check on Jake during naps, their security cameras, and even their smart doorbell. He had been watching their family's every move, learning their schedules, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to begin grooming their son. During the investigation, Detective Chin explained how Webb's methodology represented a new and terrifying evolution in child predation. Traditional predators had to physically approach children or use obvious digital platforms like social media or gaming sites, she said. This perpetrator found a way to literally enter your home through devices you trusted, speaking to your child through a voice he already knew and trusted. The psychological impact on Jake was something that concerned Lisa and Mark deeply. Despite their efforts to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms, Jake was confused about why his friend Alexa couldn't play their special games anymore. He didn't understand the danger he had been in, which in some ways was a blessing, but it also made it difficult for him to process why his routine had suddenly changed so dramatically. Child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in trauma recovery for young children, worked with the family to help Jake understand the situation without causing additional trauma. "The most important thing is that Jake knows he did nothing wrong," Dr. Martinez explained. "Children his age are naturally trusting and curious, and this predator exploited those normal, healthy traits. The case against Webb was strengthened by the digital evidence recovered from his apartment. In addition to the files on multiple families, investigators found detailed plans for escalating his contact with Jake and eventually arranging an in-person meeting. Webb had researched the family's routines extensively and had identified times when Jake played alone in the backyard, information he had gathered through the compromised security cameras. Webb had also been using social media and public records to learn more about the Davis family, building a comprehensive profile that helped him craft his conversations with Jake. He knew that Mark worked in software engineering, that Lisa worked from home on certain days, and even that they had recently celebrated Jake's 3rd birthday with a dinosaur-themed party, information he had used to build rapport with their son. The legal proceedings revealed that Webb's operation was even more extensive than initially suspected. He had developed specialized software for compromising smart home devices and had been selling this technology to other predators through dark web networks. The Davis family's case was part of a much larger criminal enterprise that law enforcement agencies across the country were working to dismantle. Marcus Webb was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on charges including child exploitation, computer fraud, invasion of privacy, and distribution of hacking tools. The judge noted that Webb's use of smart home technology to target children represented a particularly insidious form of predation that exploits the trust families place in modern technology. The case prompted changes in smart device security protocols and led to new legislation requiring stronger default security settings on devices marketed for family use. The Federal Trade Commission had already been investigating privacy violations by major smart device manufacturers, particularly regarding children's privacy protections, and the Davis case provided additional evidence for the need for stronger regulatory oversight. For Lisa and Mark, the experience fundamentally changed their relationship with technology. They removed all smart devices from their home except for essential security equipment, which they had professionally installed with enhanced encryption and monitoring. They became advocates for smart device security awareness, working with local parent groups and schools to educate other families about the potential risks. The psychological impact extended beyond just the immediate family. Jake's experience became a case study in how predators were adapting to exploit new technologies, and his story was shared, with appropriate privacy protections, and training programs for law enforcement officers, child protection workers, and cybersecurity professionals. Dr. Martinez continued working with Jake for several months after the incident, helping him understand appropriate versus inappropriate adult behavior and rebuilding his sense of security in his own home. Jake's resilience has been remarkable, she noted. Children are often more adaptable than adults in processing these experiences, especially when they have strong family support. The Davis family's ordeal highlighted a growing concern among child safety experts about the vulnerability of children in increasingly connected homes. Cybersecurity researchers have consistently discovered vulnerabilities in smart devices that could allow malicious actors to install malware and steal personal information, but the Davis case was among the first to demonstrate how these vulnerabilities could be exploited specifically for child grooming. The case also raised questions about the responsibility of technology companies to protect their users, particularly children, from malicious exploitation of their products. While companies like Amazon had implemented various security measures and parental controls, critics argued that the default settings on many smart devices prioritized convenience over security, potentially leaving families vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack the Davis family experienced. In the months following Webb's arrest, several other families came forward with similar experiences. A pattern emerged of predators specifically targeting neighborhoods with young children and systematically compromising smart home networks to gain access to potential victims. The Davis case had been the tip of an iceberg that law enforcement agencies were only beginning to fully understand. Today, Jake is a healthy, happy child who loves playing with his dog Murphy and building elaborate dinosaur worlds with his toy collection. The trauma of his experience has largely faded, thanks to his young age and the excellent support he received from his family and Dr. Martinez. He occasionally asks about the old Alexa but accepts his parents' explanation that they have new, safer ways to play music and games. Lisa and Mark have become vocal advocates for smart device security, speaking at parenting workshops and technology conferences about their experience. They emphasize that their story isn't meant to scare families away from technology entirely, but rather to encourage informed decisions about smart device usage and proper security practices. "We trusted our technology implicitly," Lisa often says during her presentations. "We thought that because we had passwords and updated software, we were protected. We learned that predators are constantly evolving their methods, and we as parents need to stay educated about these risks." The Davis family's experience serves as a sobering reminder that the same technology designed to make our lives easier and more convenient can also be exploited by those who wish to harm our most vulnerable family members. Their story continues to inform cybersecurity research, law enforcement training, and parental education programs, helping to protect other families from similar violations of trust and safety. As smart home technology continues to evolve and become more prevalent in family homes, the lessons learned from Jake's case remain more relevant than ever. The intersection of child safety and cybersecurity requires constant vigilance, ongoing education, and a commitment to prioritizing protection over convenience when it comes to our children's well-being. Authors note, this story is based on a real case that highlights the emerging threat of predators exploiting smart home technology to target children. While names and specific details have been changed to protect the family's privacy, the technical methods and grooming tactics described are based on actual law enforcement investigations and cybersecurity research. Parents are encouraged to review their smart device security settings, enable parental controls, and maintain open communication with their children about appropriate online interactions.